She thought she'd buried the past until she saw him sitting in the corner booth. The boy who disappeared without a word 10 years ago, now wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly rent. What she didn't know was that he'd become the billionaire CEO everyone whispered about, and he'd been searching for her ever since. Some reunions don't just reopen old wounds. They rewrite your entire future. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn drizzle in Portland, Oregon came down in soft sheets that afternoon, the kind of rain that didn't announce itself but simply existed, muting the world into shades of gray and gold. Inside Willow and Brew, a cozy cafe nestled between an antique bookshop and a flower studio on Hawthorne Street, the windows fogged with warmth, transforming the street outside into watercolor impressions of passing umbrellas and blurred headlights. Natalie Rivers moved behind the counter with practiced ease, her hands working in rhythms carved by repetition rather than thought. The espresso machine hissed its familiar song. The scent of freshly ground Brazilian beans mingled with hints of vanilla and cinnamon from the pastries cooling on the rack. Soft indie music played overhead, blending with the gentle murmur of afternoon conversations, the soundtrack of a life she'd built one careful, quiet piece at a time. It was Tuesday, October, 3:47 p.m., an ordinary moment in an unremarkable week, until the bell above the door chimed. Natalie glanced up from the latte she was preparing, her professional smile already forming, and froze. Every muscle in her body locked as if the air itself had turned to stone. Time didn't slow. It shattered. There, seated in the corner booth by the rain-streaked window, was a man she hadn't seen in a decade. Dominic Hayes. The name formed in her mind before she could stop it, before her heart could remember how to beat properly. He looked both familiar and impossibly different. The boy she'd loved at 19 now sat in a charcoal gray suit that screamed wealth and power, his posture radiating the kind of confidence that came from owning rooms before entering them. His dark hair, once perpetually messy from running his hands through it when he was nervous, was now styled with deliberate precision. The glasses he used to wear were gone, revealing those same storm gray eyes that once promised her forever. He was speaking to three people, clearly employees, gesturing at tablets and documents spread across the table. The overhead pendant lights caught the gleam of an expensive watch on his wrist, the kind you saw in magazine advertisements, not on the wrist of someone you used to know. Natalie's throat constricted. Her fingers trembled against the ceramic cup she was holding, and for a horrifying second, she thought she might drop it. This couldn't be real. Her mind grasped for logical explanations. Exhaustion, too many double shifts, some cruel trick born from sleepless nights and coffee-fueled hallucinations. But no, he was real, breathing, laughing at something one of his associates said. The sound of his laughter cut through her like a memory wrapped in broken glass. 10 years ago, Dominic Hayes had been her entire world. The boy who sketched building designs on napkins at diners, who drove her to the coast at midnight just to watch the waves, who held her hand during her father's funeral and promised he'd never leave. They'd talked about the future like it was a place they could visit together, college, careers, a little house with a garden where they'd plant tomatoes and wildflowers. And then, 3 days after graduation, he was gone. No call, no text, no explanation, just silence. She'd waited. God, how she'd waited. Checked her phone obsessively for months, drove past his old house hoping to see his car, even called his number until it was disconnected. Her mother had been the one to finally say the words she'd been refusing to hear. Sometimes people leave, honey, and sometimes they don't come back. Now here he sat, not just back, but transformed. Successful, powerful, untouchable. Nat, you okay? Jade, her co-worker, appeared beside her, concern flickering in her dark eyes. Natalie blinked, forcing herself back into motion. Yeah, fine. Just thought I saw someone. Jade followed her gaze toward the corner booth, her eyebrows rising. That guy? He's been coming in for the past week. Always brings his team. Tips really well. She paused, studying Natalie's pale face. Wait, do you know him? No, Natalie lied, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know him at all. But even as she said it, her heart was screaming the truth. The next 3 days passed in a fog of avoidance and hyper-awareness. Natalie traded shifts with Jade twice, claiming a headache and family obligations, anything to not be there when Dominic returned. But Portland was a small city with big city pretensions, and Willow and Brew was on his route. She knew, with sinking certainty, that another encounter was inevitable. It came on a Thursday afternoon when the cafe was mercifully quiet. The lunch rush had cleared, leaving only a handful of students hunched over laptops and an elderly couple sharing a slice of lemon cake by the window. Natalie was wiping down the espresso machine when the bell chimed. She didn't need to look up. She felt his presence like electricity in the air, the same way she used to sense him entering a room before she saw him. Dominic walked in alone this time. No entourage, no briefcase, no armor of corporate formality. Just him in dark jeans and a navy sweater, raindrops clinging to his shoulders, his hair slightly disheveled from the wind. For a heartbeat, he looked like the boy she remembered, the one who used to show up at her dorm with coffee and terrible jokes. Their eyes met across the cafe, and this time, there was no mistaking the recognition in his gaze. Something flickered there, surprise, maybe guilt, perhaps hope. It made her chest ache in ways she'd forgotten were possible. He approached the counter slowly, carefully, like someone approaching a wounded animal. When he spoke, his voice carried the same deep timbre she remembered, though now it was smoothed by years of boardroom negotiations and keynote speeches. One Americano. Black, no sugar. The order was so quintessentially him that Natalie almost laughed. Or cried. She couldn't decide which. "That'll be $4.50, she said, keeping her voice professionally neutral, her eyes fixed on the register screen. She heard him exhale, a sound that might have been relief or resignation. Natalie Rivers. Her name on his lips was a question, a confession, a prayer. "It's really you." Her fingers paused over the keys. "That's me," she said flatly, finally meeting his eyes. "Did you want a receipt with that?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips, sad and self-aware. Still sharp as ever. 10 years will do that." The words came out more bitter than she intended. "I deserve that," he said quietly, handing her a 20. "Keep the change." She wanted to refuse, to throw his money back at him, but pride was expensive and rent was due. She took it, their fingers brushing for the briefest moment. The contact sent a jolt through her system. Muscle memory of 1,000 held hands, stolen touches, moments when his presence was the only certainty she needed. Natalie busied herself with his drink, hyper-focused on the mechanical motions, grinding beans, tamping grounds, watching the espresso stream into the cup. Behind her, she could feel him waiting, watching. The silence between them grew heavy with unspoken words. "You look good," he offered when she finally slid the cup across the counter. "Different. Stronger, maybe. Time does that to people," she replied. "It changes them, whether they want it to or not." He nodded slowly, wrapping his hands around the cup like he needed something to hold on to. "I heard about your father. I'm so sorry, Natalie. I wanted to reach out, but you didn't." The words were steel wrapped in ice. "You never did." His jaw tightened. "No, I didn't. And I've regretted that every single day since." "Regret's a luxury," she said, reaching for a cloth to wipe the already spotless counter. "Some of us couldn't afford it." For a moment, neither spoke. The cafe seemed to shrink around them, reducing the world to just this counter, this conversation, this wound that had never properly healed. Dominic set down his cup and pulled something from his wallet, a sleek black business card with minimalist silver lettering. He placed it carefully on the counter between them. Dominic Hayes, Chief Executive Officer, Hayes Global Enterprises. Natalie stared at it, her mind struggling to reconcile the boy who used to save up for movie tickets with the title glaring up at her. "You're a CEO," she said, more to herself than to him. "I built something," he said quietly, "but I lost everything that mattered building it." She wanted to ask what he meant. She wanted to demand answers for 10 years of silence. She wanted to scream, to cry, to throw his card back in his face. Instead, she slipped it into her apron pocket and looked him straight in the eye. "Enjoy your coffee, Mr. Hayes." The formality landed like a slap. She saw him flinch, saw the hurt flash across his face before he could mask it. "Natalie," he started, "I need to get back to work." He stood there for another moment, searching her face for something. Forgiveness, maybe, or permission to explain. When he found neither, he simply nodded. "If you ever want to talk," he said softly, gesturing to the card in her pocket, I'll be there. Anytime. Day or night. Then he turned and walked out into the rain, leaving his barely touched Americano cooling on the counter and Natalie standing in the wreckage of a past she thought she'd escaped. Jade emerged from the back room, her eyes wide. Okay, you definitely know that guy. Natalie finally allowed herself to breathe. I used to, she whispered. A lifetime ago. The card sat on Natalie's nightstand for 3 days, its silver lettering catching the morning light like an accusation. She'd placed it there deliberately, not hidden in a drawer where she could pretend it didn't exist, but visible enough to remind her that some ghosts refused to stay buried. Her apartment in the Pearl District was small, but hers, a studio with exposed brick walls and windows that overlooked the street below. It smelled faintly of lavender from the candles she burned and the jasmine tea she drank to calm her racing thoughts. The space was cluttered with the evidence of a life lived on the margins, sketchbooks filled with interior design concepts she'd never pursued, bills organized in careful stacks, photographs of her younger brother Tyler at his college graduation ceremony last spring. After their father died from complications of diabetes when Natalie was 21, she'd put her own dreams on hold. The scholarship to the Art Institute had covered tuition but not living expenses, and when the medical bills came, wave after crushing wave, she'd made the only choice that made sense. She dropped out, took the job at Willow and Brew, and sent money home to help her mother Patricia keep their childhood house in Beaverton. Her brother had been only 15 then. Now he was thriving at Reed College, studying environmental science, oblivious to how many of Natalie's dreams had been sacrificed to fund his. She didn't resent him for it. She resented the universe for making her choose. On the 4th morning, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. There's something you need to see. Can we meet? Tomorrow, 2 p.m. My office. She knew who it was without asking. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, deleting and retyping responses. Finally, she sent, "Why?" His reply came instantly. "Because you deserve the truth about why I left." All of it. Natalie stared at her phone until the screen went dark. 10 years of silence. And now he wanted to explain? Part of her wanted to ignore him, to let the past stay buried where it belonged. But curiosity had always been her weakness, especially when it wore Dominic's face. The next afternoon, she stood outside a glass tower in downtown Portland, its reflective surface mirroring the gray sky above. The building was modern and imposing, all clean lines and corporate ambition. A brass plaque near the entrance read, Hayes Global Enterprises, Innovation Through Vision. Inside, the lobby was a cathedral of marble and steel. A receptionist with a practiced smile directed her to the 42nd floor. The elevator ascended smoothly, and Natalie watched the city shrink below her, feeling like she was leaving the world she knew for one she'd never belonged to. The doors opened to reveal a corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. A woman in a charcoal suit greeted her. "Ms. Rivers? Mr. Hayes is expecting you. This way, please." Dominic's office was exactly what she'd imagined and nothing like it at all. Yes, there was the executive desk, the leather furniture, the view that stretched from Mount Hood to the coast. But covering one entire wall were framed sketches, architectural drawings, some rough and spontaneous, others refined and detailed. Natalie stepped closer, her breath catching. She recognized the handwriting in the corners. DH plus NR. Their initials, intertwined like they used to be. "I kept everything." Dominic's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, no suit jacket this time, just shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked tired, vulnerable in a way that made her chest tighten. "Every sketch we made together. Every dream we drew." "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. He closed the door gently and gestured to the seating area. "Please, sit. There's something I need to explain, and it's going to take more than 5 minutes." Natalie lowered herself onto the leather couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Dominic sat across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, the posture of a man carrying weight he could barely hold. "The day after graduation," he began, his voice quiet but steady, "my father Richard Hayes found out about us, about how serious we were. He didn't just disapprove, Natalie. He was furious. Because I wasn't rich enough?" The bitterness in her voice was sharp. "Because you made me human," Dominic said. "My father built his empire on control and ruthlessness. He saw love as a liability, especially love for someone outside his approved circle. He told me that if I didn't end things immediately and leave town, he'd destroy everything your family had. Natalie's stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Dominic pulled out a folder from his desk and handed it to her. Inside were documents, old letters, emails, financial records. Your father worked as an accountant at Cascade Manufacturing. My father owned 60% of that company through shell corporations. He had the power to fire him, to blacklist him from every firm in the state. And he would have done it. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the papers. My father never mentioned anything about this. Because it never happened, Dominic said. I left. My father gave me an ultimatum. Go to London, join the business program there, cut all contact with you, or watch your family lose everything. I was 19 years old, Natalie. I didn't know how to fight him. I thought leaving was protecting you. So you just disappeared? Her voice cracked. You couldn't even tell me why? He monitored everything. My phone, my email, my bank accounts. I tried to write you letters from London, but he had them intercepted. I tried to call from borrowed phones, but your number changed. By the time I finally broke free from his control 3 years later, I thought you'd moved on. I thought you hated me. I did hate you, she whispered. I hated you so much it hurt to breathe. I know, he said, his voice breaking slightly. And I deserved every bit of it. Silence filled the space between them, heavy with years of misunderstanding and pain. Outside, clouds gathered over the river, promising rain. When my father died last year, Dominic continued, I found boxes of letters in his study. Letters I'd written to you that he never sent. Dozens of them. Every word I couldn't say, every apology I couldn't deliver. He kept them all as insurance, proof that he'd won. Tears burned behind Natalie's eyes. And now you're here to what? Ease your conscience? No, he said firmly. I'm here because I spent 10 years building an empire I didn't want, becoming the man my father demanded I be. And the whole time, I was just trying to become worthy of the girl I left behind. Natalie stood abruptly, the folders slipping from her hands and scattering papers across the polished floor. You don't get to do this, she said, her voice trembling with anger she'd buried for a decade. You don't get to show up after 10 years with explanations and expect everything to make sense. Dominic rose slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. Then what do you want? She demanded, her eyes blazing. What could you possibly want from me now? He was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her feel exposed. I want you to know the truth. Not the version my father created, not the story you had to tell yourself to survive, the real truth. And what truth is that? She asked bitterly. That you were a coward who chose money over love. The words hit him like physical blows, but he didn't flinch. Yes, he said simply. I was a coward. I was 19 and terrified, and I made the worst decision of my life. But it wasn't about choosing money, Natalie. It was about choosing what I thought would keep you safe. She laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Safe? You think abandoning me kept me safe? My father died 6 months after you left. 6 months. I dropped out of school to pay his medical bills. I gave up everything I wanted to become, and you weren't there. You were in London playing CEO while my world fell apart. Dominic's face went pale. I didn't know. God, Natalie, I didn't know about your father. If I had, you would have what? Come running back? Sent money. She shook her head, wiping away angry tears. I didn't need your money. I needed you, and you were gone. He moved toward her, then stopped himself, respecting the space between them. You're right. About all of it. But there's more to this story, and you need to hear it before you walk away. Then talk, she said coldly, crossing her arms. You have 5 minutes. Dominic walked to his desk and retrieved another document. This one newer, official-looking. After my father died, I hired investigators to untangle his business dealings. What I found was worse than I imagined. He handed her the paper. Cascade Manufacturing, where your father worked, was deliberately run into the ground. My father orchestrated its bankruptcy to acquire the property cheaply. Natalie scanned the document, her heart pounding. What are you saying? I'm saying my father didn't just threaten your family. He actively harmed them. The layoffs, the pension losses, the financial stress that contributed to your father's health problems. It was all connected to Richard Hayes's business strategy. His voice was thick with shame. My family's wealth was built partly on the ruins of companies like the one that employed your father. The revelation hit her like ice water. So this is about guilt, she said flatly. You're here because you feel responsible for what your father did. Partially, he admitted. But it's more complicated than that. He pulled out one more document, his hands shaking slightly. When I took over the company, I started looking into my father's hidden accounts. I found something he'd buried, a pension fund he'd diverted from Cascade employees. Your father was owed $17,000 that he never received. Natalie stared at the number on the page, her mind reeling. $17,000. That amount could have covered his medications, reduced the stress, maybe given him more time. I've already transferred it to an account in your mother's name. Dominic continued quietly. With interest, it's now $42,000. It won't bring him back, and it won't erase what my family took from yours, but it's what he was owed. She looked up at him, tears streaming freely now. You think money fixes this? You think writing a check makes up for what your family, did to mine? No, he said, his voice breaking. Nothing fixes this. But I needed you to know that I'm not here to play savior or to buy your forgiveness. I'm here because our families were connected in ways neither of us understood, and because the truth deserves to be told, even when it's ugly. Natalie sank back onto the couch, her legs suddenly unable to support her. I don't know what to do with this information, she whispered. I spent 10 years hating you, and now you're telling me it was all part of something bigger, something neither of us controlled. Dominic sat beside her, not too close, but close enough that she could feel his presence. I'm not asking you to stop hating me. I'm just asking you to hate me for the right reasons. Despite everything, she almost smiled at that. It was so typically him, bluntly honest in a way that disarmed her defenses. There's one more thing, he said, pulling out his phone and showing her a series of architectural renderings. I bought the old Cascade manufacturing property 6 months ago. I'm rebuilding it as a community arts center with subsidized studio spaces for local artists and designers. The images showed a transformed building, the industrial bones preserved but reimagined with light-filled studios, gallery spaces, and workshops. One section was labeled Rivers Design Studio. What is this? She asked, her voice barely audible. A space for you, he said simply. No strings attached. Whether you forgive me or not, whether you ever speak to me again or not, it's yours. You gave up your dreams because of what my father did. I can't give you back those years, but I can give you the space to reclaim what you lost. Natalie looked from the renderings to his face, searching for manipulation, for hidden agendas. She found only exhaustion and something that looked like hope dying slowly in his eyes. Why? She asked. Why go this far? Because some debts can't be paid in money, he said. And because I loved you then. And he stopped himself, shaking his head. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you get what you should have had all along. The silence that followed was different, not angry or bitter, but heavy with possibility and pain intertwined. Outside, the rain began, soft against the windows, and Natalie felt something inside her begin to shift, like ice cracking after a long winter. 6 months passed like seasons turning, slowly at first, then all at once. The rain that defined Portland's autumn gave way to winter's crisp cold, then spring's hesitant bloom. Through it all, Natalie watched as the old Cascade manufacturing building transformed from a hollow shell into something alive with possibility. She didn't make the decision to accept Dominic's offer immediately. For weeks, she wrestled with pride, with anger, with the fear that accepting anything from him meant betraying the girl she'd been when he left. But her mother's words, spoken over tea one Sunday afternoon, finally broke through her resistance. Your father would have wanted you to take it, Patricia had said, her weathered hands wrapped around her mug. He always believed that opportunities didn't care where they came from, only what you did with them. So Natalie said yes. Not to Dominic, but to herself. The Rivers Design Studio occupied the entire 3rd floor of the renovated building, with windows stretching from floor to ceiling and natural light pouring across wooden floors salvaged from the original structure. Her name was etched in brushed steel beside the entrance, a declaration that she belonged in spaces like this, that her dreams had weight and permanence. She didn't see Dominic often during those months. He kept his distance, communicating through his project manager, ensuring she had everything she needed without imposing his presence. It was a kind of respect she hadn't expected, a patience that spoke louder than any grand gesture could have. On the day of the community center's grand opening, spring had finally arrived in full force. Cherry blossoms lined the streets, and the air smelled of rain-washed earth and new beginnings. Natalie stood in her studio, arranging design portfolios on display tables, when she heard footsteps behind her. "It's beautiful," Dominic said softly. "Everything you've created here." She turned to find him standing in the doorway, looking more like the boy she remembered than the CEO he'd become. He wore jeans and a simple gray sweater, his hair slightly mussed, his eyes carrying that familiar mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. "For all of this. I know I never properly said it before." "You don't owe me thanks," he replied, stepping into the space but maintaining careful distance. "This was always meant to be yours." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, surrounded by the evidence of her reclaimed dreams, sketches pinned to cork boards, fabric samples arranged by color, a drafting table positioned to catch the afternoon light. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Natalie began, her voice steady. "About hating you for the right reasons. And I realized something. I don't hate you anymore. I don't know what I feel exactly, but it's not hate." Dominic's expression shifted, vulnerability flickering across his features. "What is it then?" "Complicated," she admitted with a small smile. "You hurt me, and that doesn't just disappear. But you also came back. You told the truth even when it made you look worse. You gave me something real when you could have just thrown money at your guilt and walked away." "I'm trying to be different than my father," he said quietly. "I'm trying to build things instead of destroying them. But I'm still learning how." "Aren't we all?" she said. She walked to the window, looking down at the courtyard where people were beginning to gather for the opening ceremony. "My brother graduates next month. Top of his class. And my mother finally retired. Bought a little cottage near the coast with the money you transferred to her." "I'm glad," Dominic said, joining her at the window. "They deserve happiness." "So do you," Natalie said, surprising herself with the words. She turned to face him. "I'm not ready to forget everything that happened. And I can't promise this. Us will ever be what it was. Too much has changed." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for what we had. I'm asking if maybe we could build something new. Something that acknowledges the past, but isn't trapped by it." She studied his face. The man he'd become overlaid with shadows of the boy he'd been. "I think I'd like that," she said slowly. "But it has to be different this time. Honest. Real. No more secrets or sacrifices made in silence." "No more secrets," he agreed. "Just truth, even when it's hard." The sound of music drifted up from below, a local band beginning to play. Dominic extended his hand, not in romance, but in partnership. Partners, then? In building something better? Natalie looked at his hand for a long moment before taking it. His grip was warm, familiar yet changed, like coming home to a house that had been rebuilt with stronger foundations. "Partners," she agreed. They walked down to the ceremony together, not as lovers reunited, but as two people learning to trust again. Patricia was there, beaming with pride. Tyler had driven up from Reed College, his camera ready to document everything. Jade from the cafe waved enthusiastically from the crowd. When Natalie stepped up to cut the ribbon alongside Dominic and the other community leaders, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, not just hope, but certainty. The past couldn't be rewritten, and some wounds would always bear scars. But standing there in the spring sunlight, surrounded by people who believed in second chances and new beginnings, she understood something fundamental. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing to build something better with the broken pieces. As the ribbon fell away and applause erupted around them, Dominic leaned close enough for only her to hear. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving me the chance to do better." "Thank you for being worth the chance," she replied. The community center filled with people, artists claiming studio spaces, families exploring the galleries, children running through halls that once echoed with machinery but now rang with laughter. And in that moment, watching dreams take root in salvaged ground, Natalie finally understood what her father had tried to teach her all those years ago, that the most beautiful things are often built from the ruins of what came before. She didn't know what the future held with Dominic, whether this fragile new beginning would grow into something lasting or remain a gentle friendship built on shared history and mutual healing. But for the first time in a decade, she was okay with not knowing. Some questions didn't need immediate answers. Some stories were meant to unfold slowly, one honest moment at a time. And as spring rain began to fall outside, soft and forgiving, Natalie smiled. Not because the past had been erased, but because the future had finally become something she could believe in again. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.